All right, welcome back to All Cars Y'all. I am John. It's time for another Motorweek Retro review reaction. This week it is the 1986 Honda CRX Si. Now, I'm doing this one because, well, I did the Del Sol a few weeks ago, and this is technically not really... The Del Sol replaced this, but it never replaced the usability of it, and it's a cool vehicle. They had an 84, but I thought the 86 would be a little more interesting to get into. So without a big, long introduction here, sit back in your comfy chair, grab your beverage of choice, and let's take a little trip down memory lane.
Models such as the LeSabre and the Charade do get our attention, but that doesn't mean we neglect cars that get yearly changes for the better. A very small but big case in point is this Honda CRX Si. It's sort of a souped-up CRX, but while the CRX has changed, it still remained loyal to its Honda civic duty
of adding a flourishing fun quotient to even the most mundane of daily commutes. The first CRX was a small wonder, only 12 feet long, weighing in at 1,800 pounds, and it delivered an amazing 54 miles per gallon for us.
Absolutely astonishing to think of. That 1,800 pounds. That's amazing. We forget how light those cars could be. Certainly, as safety standards and all of the electronics and all the wiring and all the luxuries we demand as consumers now has bulked that weight up, and EVs are making it worse. 1,800 pounds. CRX. I've driven several, never owned one, of course, but I've driven several, and before we get into it here, let's just say that I always liked the styling. I liked the Civic cut down, but still have a hatchback. It had a lot of versatility. It was fun to drive. It was tossable, that light, airy tossability that I love. The other things that I really remember, made big impressions on me, were, first off, I remember the seats being super low. And the other thing is because it was so small, it never felt safe. That's the word. I mean, you know, I've driven like MGBs and Miatas and things like that, and I never felt unsafe. I always felt very conscious of how small the car was. The CRX, there was something about it psychologically for me. I felt like I was trapped in a little box. I loved them, but I don't know I ever would have parted with my money for them.
Based on the new front-wheel drive Civic sedan, the 84 CRX started a trend back to the use of space-saving torsion bar suspensions. We were very impressed with the CRX's combination of interior comfort for two and the utility of its massive hatch and long, flat storage bay. Much more than anyone ever thought possible in a car with only an 86.6-inch wheelbase. The standard engine was a 1.3-liter, and it produced 60 horsepower. But even with the larger 76-horse 1.5-liter four-cylinder and its accompanying sports suspension additions, we weren't as convinced as some that the CRX was a new breed of sports car. Acceleration was very good, but the brakes were prone to easy lock. While the non-power rack and pinion steering was first-rate, the suspension bottomed out in tight curves, and this left the CRX to sometimes bounce rather than glide around switchbacks. And if handling was something like a go-kart, the highway ride was more so. We understood why even the old torsion bar folks at Chrysler haven't put them on a new model in a decade. But then...
That's all really interesting because there's a myth, and I do perpetuate it a little bit here. There's a myth of the 80s that the Japanese manufacturers could do no wrong. You know, while the American manufacturers were trying to figure out how to build a four-cylinder, well, Honda was building an overhead cam four-cylinder, multi-valve, right? While the American manufacturers were penny-pinching their way into drum brakes, the Japanese manufacturers were putting disc brakes on everything, you know, while the American manufacturers were making do with an old 3-speed automatic. The Japanese were developing 4-speed automatic. So it's really interesting to hear that in '84 they came out with the CRX, and Motorweek's opinion was, let's cut through the BS here, it wasn't very good. It rode poor, didn't have a lot of power, didn't handle that well. I mean, just a surprisingly negative take on the car. But this one's about the '86, so let's see what they say.
Then came 1985, or rather 1985 and a half, and the addition of the Honda CRX Si. SI stands for sequential port injection. Like all sequential systems, this Honda design times fuel delivery to each individual cylinder, rather than to all of them at once, as in most 4-cylinder multi-port systems. On the 3-valve per cylinder 1.5 CRX motor, the SI boosts horsepower 20% to 91 and torque 11% to 93 pound-feet. And performance improved accordingly. 0 to 60, 9.5 seconds. Quick and 0.7 of a second quicker than the '84 model.
That's pretty good. That's pretty darn good. I mean, you know, by today's standards, when you have 6,000-pound EVs doing it in 3.8 seconds, yeah, it sounds slow. But for 1986, that's pretty peppy. I don't know that I would ever classify the CRX as sports car. I've heard that term a lot thrown around, and it's not just a hatchback Civic, but I really classify this more as a hot hatch than anything else. But not too bad. I'll talk about the looks here.
With the same slick shifting 5-speed as before, the SI went through a quarter mile in 16.8 seconds at 80 miles per hour. And our 40 to 55 passing trial is a short 3.7 seconds. In fact, the CRX Si tested faster than any other non-turbocharged model in its price class. There was also some performance injection for the CRX Si handling. Wider 13-inch alloy wheels and fairly aggressive 70 series tires. But otherwise, the CRX Si suspension remained the same as before. An anti-roll bar is located inside the rear axle that is suspended by gas shocks. Thus, the nimble and stable attitude of the CRX Si continued, and so did its shortcoming. That's grinding over irregularities in the pavement, even if the new tires did absorb more shock. The SI package has ventilated front disc brakes, a revised proportioning valve, and larger calipers and rotors than the standard CRX. This car had none of the instant lockup and rear-end squirminess we found before. Stops were short with a very secure average of 103 feet from 55, definitely in the sports car class.
Very interesting. This one is so different than any of the others we've seen, where they're actually going through 3 different years, it appears, of the car. But the changes are pretty impressive. And I like the comment about they changed the tires and it helps improve a little bit at least. You know, one of the things I've become increasingly more passionate about is that in cars today we're getting larger and larger and larger wheels, and that's doing a couple of different things. The first off is it actually is reducing our fuel economy, and the second thing is by providing less sidewall, we're not getting as good a ride as we used to. I mean, I don't know. There's a part of me that's like, gosh, guys, can you just come out with a 15-inch tire? I mean, just a 15-inch wheel, right? Give me some thick walls and give me a soft ride again. Anyway, neither here nor there. Interesting how they're doing this. Performing well, that's not much better. At least the guy didn't slide off into a ditch.
The SI got some notable changes on the outside, too. The aggressive front air dam was complemented with a more prominent rear spoiler. But we found the same flaws in paint finish and flimsy body panels as on previous CRX models.
Well, let's stop again there. Let's talk about the styling real quick. These earlier ones, I don't love them. The square headlights just doesn't do it for me. But the overall shape of the car, I love it. I absolutely adore it. The short little hood and that little almost pug-nose rear end back there, big chunky lights. It's not beautiful. You would never look at this and think it was Italian. Let's put it that way. But I always thought it looked just great, and all the proportions looked really, really good on it.
But a power sunroof was standard on the SI, and it's a nifty design that opens outward to preserve the CRX's exceptional headroom. And the SI got a standard wiper and washer to keep the huge hatch crystal clear. Inside, though, things were still pretty much standard CRX, with a big wide dash and very clear instrumentation, but still without either a voltage or oil pressure gauge. The seats weren't as supportive as we'd like, yet the padding was too hard, also as in earlier CRXs. So the 85.5 CRX Si was an improvement on the 84 model, but Honda didn't stop there. For 86, the CRX Si gets better yet.
Okay, and so go back there to what they were saying is they were still criticizing it for flimsy body panels and paint quality. That's really, really surprising, because one of the things, and I think it's that book right there, one of the things that part of the Japanese invasion of when Americans were hit with fuel crises in the 70s, and all of a sudden they're like, Japanese cars. One of the things was, like, when the Accord came out, that it had a paint finish as good as some luxury cars from Europe. So for them to comment negatively about the paint on a Honda, that's really, really a surprise. In fact, part of that book, they were talking about the development of the J cars, like the Cavalier, and that because of our regulations, I think in California, GM couldn't even replicate what Honda was doing on how they were applying paint in like the late 70s, early 80s. So that's really interesting that to watch a review where it seems like for most of my life, and certainly in the 80s, it was just positive, positive, positive about Japanese cars, to hear negatives about it. Now with the 86 model here, this is where it really starts to get great looking. Don't particularly like the white, I'll be honest with you, but the new headlights, slightly revised styling, I just love it. And I'm going to tell you what here, if you kind of squint a little bit and maybe cover up the rear so you don't see how short it is, I'll be darned if that doesn't, especially with that lower level CRX, that writing right there, I'll be darned if that doesn't show off just a little bit of Dodge Daytona vibes to me.
Outside, there's a sleeker front end with flush headlights. In addition, all bumpers are now body colored, and the rear spoiler now flows with the body. But let's look down at the road for the biggest plus. Honda listens, and listens fast, and the still too small tires of last spring's SI have been replaced with racy 14-inch cast wheels and 60 series performance radials. So the handling quality of the CRX Si is up another notch, and the ride is now much more to our liking. So after a quick evolution, we congratulate Honda on the CRX Si's above average and now comprehensive performance. Its use of interior space and frugal economy have always been excellent, but now there are features such as the power sunroof and aggressive styling that complement the CRX's sports car, yes, sports car spirit. But the CRX Si still misses the mark in some ways too, with seats that supported us wrong and paint and body finish that look a bit underdone, even for the SI's modest $8,500 base price. Yes, 3 years have made a lot of difference in this little Honda. With the Si model, the CRX can now be something truly unique, a highly practical and affordable sports and commuter slot car that does most things quite right.
And we're quite finished for now, so we'll see you next time on Motorweek.
But stay tuned while I have my final thoughts here. That was so interestingly structured to walk through 3 years, basically, of its development, but also fascinating to see how fast Honda was moving and addressing concerns. I think it's really the next generation that became the one that was set in my mind and that I remember so fondly. I don't remember right now off the top of my head, but I think that's where they made they should put glass back there where the spoiler is to help increase rear visibility. You know, a lot here they didn't talk about the high loading height to get the luggage in. They didn't talk about the fuel economy. They didn't really try to compare it to anything else, like, I don't know, a Dodge Colt or something like that. Basically just very, very positive, and to trace the car as it improved. I like it. The fact is I like it, and I like it more the further away we've gotten from it. That idea of a cheap, somewhat performance-oriented, tossable, cheap car, just kind of cool. And the CRX always stood out for me because it wasn't like you took the base level Dodge Colt and then just, you know, put a bigger engine in it, or you took the Golf and became the GTI or anything like that. They actually changed it a little bit and made it its own little product. I like it. And again, when it was out there, never felt safe in it. You know, I never felt unsafe, but I always felt very conscious that car would just like fold up in an accident. The later cars that kind of are like this, with was it the Mazda MX-3, the NX? Yeah, the Pulsar NX, things like that. This had more usability because of that big hatch. It really holds a pretty special place for me because it was small, kind of sporty, not real powerful, not meant to be a long distance cruiser, but still had that hatchback area that gave it a lot of space. Interesting video, not as earth-shattering as I expected it to be, but a really fun trip down memory lane. And they really didn't dwell on that interior very much. I'll close with this. Kind of underwhelming. Gotta remember, this is the mid-'80s. Honda and everybody else was still trying to figure it out, but kind of an underwhelming interior. It just didn't excite me at all. But I'm sure it was functional, and I bet it held up just fine. If you have any memories, of course, about a CRX, share it with us below, positive or negative. I'm curious to hear, because this one holds a place in my heart. Very memorable car from my teenage years, honestly. At a time when I loved my big American cars. You know, when this car was out, I was driving a 76 Buick Regal. Let's remember that. So, love to hear from you guys. Thanks for being here. Bye.